apparently we have big competition for tonight. There is a certain hockey game happening, so we think that some of our fans might be at home watching that game instead. But nonetheless, thank you very much for everybody that's here. My name is Jean-Marie Guerrier. I am on the board of Black History Ottawa. I'm the vice president of Black History Ottawa. And we've teamed up with Bob Dawson for 6 years, I think, now to put on some great events to celebrate hockey, celebrate blacks in hockey. And in particular, this evening, we're going to celebrate the 130th anniversary of the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes. And just a little bit about Black History Ottawa. We're a non-profit organization, registered charity, actually. And we put on events throughout the year, events to celebrate and highlight contributions of Black Canadians to Canadian and to society in general. So our events are not only in February, we do events throughout the year. Tonight, the event that we're putting on, it's part of a series of events. Last night, we had a youth hockey clinic with the African Hockey Association that was held at the Canadian Tire Center. So a lot of these events are in partnership with the Ottawa Senators. Tonight, we have this great special presentation on the Colored Hockey League, followed by a panel discussion. And then on Saturday, we're gonna have our Black History Month Appreciation Night. So this is during the game, that'll be during the game between Montreal and Ottawa on Saturday. So we'll have some people involved in the ceremonial face-off. And also throughout the night, there'll be on the Jumbotron, there'll be information about blacks and hockey. A lot of that information is stuff that was prepared by the National Hockey League. And the last event that we'll do is a commemorative hockey game. It disappeared, but yes, we have the jerseys up there. We have them here too. So we've started this in 2017 when we were celebrating Canada 150, and we've turned it into an annual tradition where we have a game with community, people in the community that come out to play. And again, we do that in partnership with the SEN, so they usually give us ice time to where we host a game. So that will be this Monday, February 24th at 7 p.m. So you are invited to come. It's free parking and admission is free as well. For tonight's event, a lot of it was put on together by our great friend Bob Dawson. And I'll tell you a little bit about Bob, and then he'll come and take over the rest of the evening. So Bob was born in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and he attended St. Mary's University in Halifax. And in 1967, he became the first black to play in the Atlantic Intercollegiate Hockey League. Darryl Maxwell and Percy Paris later joined him on the Huskies. During a game at Mount Allison University in New Brunswick in February 1970, the trio played together to become the first and only all-black line in Canadian university hockey. Rather than pursuing a career in hockey, Bob went on to Dalhousie University, where he graduated in 1973 with a master's degree in social work. And after graduating, he joined the Federal Public Service of Canada, where he worked for 37 years in human resources management in the areas of career development, employment equity, diversity, recruitment, and staffing. While living in Ottawa, Bob worked in partnership with community organizations and universities in organizing conferences on issues related to hockey. He co-authored a policy paper for anti-racism in Canadian hockey. Back in February 2016, Bob made a submission to Canada Post for a stamp to commemorate the Colored Hockey League of the Maritime. And he started that initiative because 2020 was going to be the 125th anniversary of the Colored Hockey League. So that submission was later approved. And what you see here is the result of Bob's initiative. So Canada Post issued the Black History Month in 2020 as a Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes. And in January 2023, he was awarded the Carnegie Lifetime Achievement Award for his work in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in hockey. Also, in May 2023, he received an honorary doctorate degree in civil law from his alma mater, St. Mary's University, for his commitment, work and leadership in anti-Black racism beyond hockey and in the wider Canadian society. One thing that he did mention here, to emphasize the significance of the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes, Bob, in July 2022, submitted a request to the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada to have the league designated as an event of national historic significance. So the board approved his request, and on October 9, 2024, they announced the decision to designate the Colored Hockey League as a historic site. So Bob, so this is Bob Dawson. I just give you a little bit of what he does, but he writes also for different papers, and he always makes sure that he promotes hockey. Even people in the community, when their kids are having issues, they turn to him to help as well. So Bob, why don't you join me so we can, I think you're going to introduce this in the next part of the evening. Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. I know it's been a challenge in terms of the weather, and as Jean-Marie had mentioned, the Canada hockey game is on tonight. So in light of that, we'll sort of march on with what we have in store for you. I think in terms of beginning the initial part, I thought it would be important to allow you to see an ESPN video that George and Daryl Fosty were involved in, along with, as I said, ESPN on the Colored Hockey League, as a prelude to the panel discussion. I don't know, I suspect many of you may not have seen this video, but as I said, I thought it would be a good introduction to the second part of the evening. And it might generate questions that you may have for George and the others. So, Jean-Marie, if you care to.
George is born in Prince Rupert in BC. George is a military and sports historian, a documentary filmmaker, and publisher. He holds a Master and Bachelor of Arts degree in American history, along with a diploma in international law and a legal generalist certificate. During the First Gulf War, George was employed as a military historian at the Shepherd Air Force Base in North Texas, where he documented and preserved Air Force history to the creation of a museum and several community history museum displays. From 1994 to 2007, he worked extensively in the New York City legal community with several prominent U.S. and international legal firms. George is co-founder, editor of the Box Score World Sports Wire and Card Beats Canada. He is a co-author of 15 books, including Splendid is the Sun, the 5,000-year history of hockey, and that was published in 2003, Black Ice, the lost history of the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes, and Tribes, and an international hockey history. He co-produced several ice hockey documentaries, such as Black Ice Frozen Out and the Black Ice documentary. In 2019, the Book Authority selected Black Ice as one of the top 37 ice hockey books of all time. Black History Ottawa in 2020 awarded George and his brother Daryl with the John Dennison Award for excellence in promoting and preserving Canadian Black history and culture. So without further ado, let me introduce you to George Fosty, who's going to tell us about his book and some new findings that he's had since the book was first published.
Next year we'll mark the 40th anniversary of my brother and I being working together as professional historians. We began in 1986, as military historians at Langley, British Columbia. We were documenting the men of the South Saskatchewan Regiment who fought at Dieppe in 1942. We were invited to go in and to their war reunion during Expo 86, and we spent 3 days sitting down documenting their stories and trying to validate some of their claims. A lot of these men were made famous in the book Green Beach by James Leeser, the English historian and writer, and their unit, their regiment had been disbanded in the late 1960s by the Canadian government when they were cutting back on the military, and they were quite angry at the way they had been treated by history and historians and by the Canadian government and Department of Defense. And so we spent a few days with them, and then we followed up over the years through letters and other correspondence, and I eventually went off to Texas to work on my master's, and I specialized in the area of history, battle at Dieppe, and the espionage aspects of it, and that's what I earned my master's on, or what's my thesis. And while I was teaching in North Texas, Shepherd Air Force Base was celebrating its 50th anniversary. Shepherd had been a major military base during World War II. Over 1 million men had, over the years, had been trained on that base. It was the largest military base for NJEP, Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program. It was the largest German Air Force base outside of Germany, and located 100 miles north of Dallas. And when they were celebrating their 50th anniversary, they were looking for a World War II specialist. And a lot of military men at that base were taking courses at the school I was teaching, working at Midwestern State University, and they recommended me to their commander. And even though I wasn't a U.S. citizen, still not a U.S. citizen, because of my skills, they were able to have me hired to work with the U.S. government on a 4-month renewable contract that lasted almost 2 years. And in that process, my job was to document North Texas aviation history from Amelia Earhart all the way up to the modern period. And in that process, we built 3 museums, identified over 12,000 artifacts, identified over 10,000 photos, worked on 3 documentaries, and we wrote 1 book, which won the Air Training Command Book of the Year award. Myself and 2 other historians wrote that book, and it was all done in 1.5 years, which was amazing, especially given that one of the historians was called to serve in Saudi Arabia to document the A-10 Warthog aircraft and their kill ratios during the first Gulf War. A lot of our research was being used by the war colleges to plan for future wars. That's what they were using military historians for. And we spent a lot of time, 16-hour days, trying to coordinate and write our reports and our assessments of different military histories, events, and ongoing happenings, I guess would be the word for it. Plus, we had to write base histories, military histories, on an annual report. So it was a major training opportunity and experience that I cherish to this day. But in the course of documenting and working for the Air Force, we had maintained Daryl, my brother and I had maintained our interest in working on the battle at Dieppe. And in the early 90s, when I moved to New York, and I started working in the legal field following my contract with the Air Force and U.S. government, we hit a dead end. We couldn't get access to military records from the Canadian government to validate some of the claims made by these South Saskatchewan regimental men. And so we were in a tough spot. We couldn't finish our book. We couldn't prove some of their claims. So we decided we would take a break and maybe do something different. We thought we'd maybe write a hockey history. And we started to research the history of hockey. We thought it would take 6 months. And in that process, it took us 6 years to document the history of hockey. We wrote a book called Splendid as the Sun, the 5,000-year history of hockey. And in that book, we identified 48 different cultures across 5 continents and 13 different languages that had a hockey tradition ranging from ball and stick games all the way up to ice hockey. And in that search for evidence, we reviewed over, working with an English historian by the name of John Jelly, we identified over 6,000 hockey sources worldwide. And of that, we found 3 references to the Colored Hockey League. They were, and in those references, they didn't even mention the words Colored Hockey League. One was a footnote from a 1923 journal that simply said, black hockey players playing in the Maritimes. That was the line. It was a footnote in an obscure book from 1923. The next time we came across this reference to the Colored Hockey League was a 1990 2-volume set called Beyond Heroes, written by Sandy Jones, an American journalist who was living in Halifax. He wrote about the history of Halifax and Nova Scotia sports. It was called Beyond Heroes, a 2-volume set, and he had a single page in his book, and it had a picture of an unidentified black hockey team, and the line was very simple, just a simple sentence that said, black Canadians also played hockey, and then there was a comma that said, and they even had their own league. When we saw that line that said, and they even had their own league, our eyes lit up. So we started doing searches for additional information. We found Garth Vaughan's 1996 book, where he had 4 pages, and he had made reference to the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes. He talked about flopping goalies. Then we went out and we found a book called Black Islanders by Jim Hornby. He talked about a hockey team out of Prince Edward Island. After 2 years of research, we had 4 sources. We thought maybe we could write a chapter. But what happened was we picked up a book one day called Diamonds of the North. It was written by a gentleman from Seneca College called, now the name escapes me, but a professor from Seneca College. And he had a simple little paragraph where he talked about black hockey teams that doubled in the summer as baseball teams and vice versa. And he made reference to one team that caught our attention, the Dartmouth Jubilees. And in that one sentence, he said that these gentlemen had named their team in honor of Queen Victoria's Silver Jubilee. And we knew, as military historians, that the word Jubilee did not mean, it was not a reference to Queen Victoria's Silver Jubilee. We knew that was a reference to the book of Habakkuk. Behold ye among the heathen, I will work a work in your day which you not believe, though be told you so. And in that, they talked about the freeing of the slaves in the year of Jubilee. And as historians working on Dieppe was codenamed Operation Jubilee. It was named, codenamed in honor of that passage from the Bible. And so as Dieppe historians, we knew that that team had a dual meaning, that that team's name was designed to make it look like it was in honor of Queen Victoria, but it was also a way for the blacks to recognize their past history and to make a political statement without people realizing they're making a political statement. So we suddenly recognized the fact that these names on these team rosters were codified. We looked at old Bibles from the 1890s, and we found the reference to Eureka, Halifax, Eureka, and that means I had found God. We looked at the mossbacks, Hammond Plains mossbacks, that name, and it jumped out at us because a moss grows on the north side of trees, and when the slaves are going north at night, they would touch the trees in the forest to figure out which way north. Because if you've ever been in the woods at night, it's so dark you can't see a foot in front of you. I worked on the railroads as a kid up in the Canadian Rockies, and I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to switch our unit onto the track, and we'd be standing out there, and you could not see your hand when you're switching track. The forests are so black and so dark that all you could do is walk forward like this. And with these guys touching the moss on the side of the tree, they knew they were going north. So we knew that mossbacks had a dual meaning. So once we identified these names, we started going back and trying to figure out how did it apply to the history of the Underground Railroad? How did it apply to early black history? How did it apply to Nova Scotia history? And we recognized that some of these teams had originated as church league teams, so we could explain the references to the church names like the Eurekas and others. But we also recognized in the course of looking at all of this history that there was a few photographs that we couldn't identify. And I started phoning around the country, phoning up leading hockey historians, everyone, and leading black historians like Robin Winks, who had written the book Black Canadians. He was teaching at Yale at the time and was still alive. I phoned him up and I was asking him about these hockey pictures we had found. And he couldn't explain them. And so we phoned up guys like Bill Fitzel at the Society for International Hockey Historians and Researchers, and we asked him what these teams were, and we got a mixed bag. They said that these weren't real teams; these were vaudeville acts, and that blacks couldn't escape, and their ankles were too weak, and this is the kind of stuff they were telling us. But I kept looking at those pictures, and I kept thinking, no, these are real teams. I can tell these aren't vaudeville acts. I could just tell by the uniforms and by the equipment they're wearing. And so I called up the Black Cultural Center one day, and I was talking to a gentleman by the name of Henry Bishop out in North Preston. And I said, told him who I was, and I told him I was trying to figure out, identify these teams, and I said, I've got a picture here, and I was wondering if you knew anything about it. He said, yeah, we have it on our wall. And I said, what year is it? He said 1903, and I said, well, that's great. He said, yeah, we also know the names of all the guys on that team. And I said, well, I got the picture in front of me. Can you tell me who these players are? And he said, sure. So I said, well, I'll start with line one. And I started naming off this player left, first player to the left, and he'd give me a name, and I'd write it down. And then I got line two, and he gave me the list. And I said, well, in line three, and he said, well, there's no such thing as a line three. I said, no, there is. I'm sitting here looking at it. He said, no, you got it wrong. There was only two lines. And I suddenly realized that he was looking at a totally different picture than I was. And suddenly we had three different team photos. We had previously had only two. We had three, but one of them we had identified all the players. And from that, I was able to go back into Nova Scotia history with my brother and start to pull any documents we had on those specific list of 12 names. What started off was two simple footnotes and references in books over a 7-year period became black ice. It took us 7 years to write that book. We found 65 newspaper sources. We found about 200 historical references in books to different aspects of the story, mostly out of American obscure American histories. We found a pattern that was amazing. We found out that some of the early deacons and ministers at the churches in Halifax were proponents of Booker T. Washington's concepts. They were, within 6 months of whenever Booker T. Washington would write a book, these guys up in Halifax would get a copy and then try to initiate his suggestions from his books. So we found a book called Negro for the New Century, written in 1900. And within 6 months of that book being published, we saw that a gentleman by the name of James A.R. Kinney, Alexander Ross Kinney, was trying to initiate the suggestions from that book. And so what we did was we went out and grabbed every book we could, ever written by Booker T, and we sat there and read every one of his books over what was a 20-year period. And then we layered that history on top of the Colored Hockey League history we had, and on top of the black history of Nova Scotia, and on top of the other evidence we had. And what we were able to do was we saw a pattern. We saw that these guys were working with a plan. They were working with the Tuskegee plan. And it was from that we were able to go back and look at the churches and start to see how these guys were affected and how they were linked and how they were tied to Booker T and other groups. And again, it was one of these just incredible layering of history over a long period of time, just discovering as we went. There was no books that told us we were doing the right thing. We were just finding these little threads and piecing it together. And at the end of the day, when the book came out in 2004, nobody believed it. Right? We actually got death threats from at least 4 different groups, mostly out of Ohio and out of southern Ontario. We were called a lot of different things. We were attacked in the press on national televisions. They tried to discredit us, tried to claim we weren't really historians, even though we all had, my brother and I have degrees in history, and I've got national honors in history. It was just amazing, the assault on our character and on the book and on this history that we just did not expect. We were shell-shocked for the first couple of years, but then ESPN showed up in 2007, and that's where they did this documentary, 8-minute documentary, working with Jeremy Schaap, and we spent 3 months working on that project. And after that, all the floodgates opened. And in the years since, when we said in 2008 that we thought we had discovered 30% of the story. In the years that followed, we went forward and continued to research, and now this year, in 2025, marks the 30th anniversary, or 30 years that Daryl and I have quietly been researching this history, trying to piece it together. We believe now we have 60 to 70% of the story as told. This year marks the 130th anniversary of the Colored Hockey League. Of that 130th anniversary, it also marks the 20th anniversary of the release of our book. During that time, we've been able to add in the new book 120 more pages of detailed information specific to the hockey aspects of the Colored Hockey League. We now are able to trace that league from 1895 all the way up to 1936. Even better, we've been able to reconstruct 85 complete and partial team rosters of teams, all black hockey teams that existed before 1940. In addition, we've been able to trace the migration and the movements of black hockey players beginning in 1895 and all the way up through the 1930s. A lot of these guys ended up as porters on the railroads. A lot of them moved to the United States with their families. We were able to see where they continued to play hockey. We were able to also identify specific regions where blacks were playing and how those hockey teams evolved. We found that by the mid-1920s, when we thought the league had collapsed in the Halifax area, but it had been reborn in New Glasgow and Amherst and Truro, Nova Scotia. And those guys had actually built a modern structure where they actually had a level for young kids, a developmental level for young kids coming up, and they fed the better players into their senior league, which was playing across the province through those towns mostly. And then the best players went south to Boston, where they were members of a second tier, or what would be considered a Quebec-Aces level team, senior men's Canadian Championship team level. Their team was called the Boston Black Panthers. And this team was actually they were actually trying to build this team into a professional team so they could gain entry into the National Hockey League as early as 1927, 1928. These guys had played in Madison Square Garden exhibition games here in New York, or down in New York. They were playing in a white league in the suburbs of Boston. And Frank Calder, the president of the National Hockey League, had even said he would not be opposed to a black team playing in the National Hockey League. What prevented them from gaining entry wasn't racism, it was the reality of their skill level. By the late 1920s, there was only a handful of teams in the National Hockey League, and the talent pool to get in there had to be extremely high. And although these guys had the talent, they didn't have enough talent to put a team of all blacks into the NHL. So as they struggled to build their structure all the way up into the early 1930s, they were basically undercut by the Depression, and by 1936 the realities of the Great Depression came to play. At the same time, there was competition elsewhere to try to create a professional black hockey team, and Russell Veltz's Colored Monarchs out of Minneapolis was vying to put together a team like a Harlem Globetrotters level squad, and he was recruiting heavily out of Truro, Nova Scotia. And he was recruiting across the country, and at the end of the day, his attempts to pulled players away from the Black Panthers and others, resulted in the destruction of what was left of the Colored Hockey League. It resulted in the collapse of this three-tier system in Nova Scotia, and it basically scattered a lot of players to the wind across North America. And they were showing up in places, and later on showing up in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, and even Southern California. So, you know, what we see today is a much more complex picture of the Colored Hockey League than we had ever seen during the early years of our research. And what's amazing now is that it's possible for families of the Colored Hockey League to trace the movement of their ancestors who played in that league and where they went. And we can, and that to me is the most rewarding aspect of this. It's a restoring of family histories. It's restoring of hockey histories. It's restoring of Canadian history, and it's also advancing research into the Colored Hockey League and other leagues that are lesser known, and then allowing this whole new field of historic research to open up. So that's where we are today, 30 years on. I'm excited because when I read this book that just came out, I see 5 or 6 avenues that we can go down now that we couldn't go down in 2003. We now know that Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, had the largest black population at the turn of the century in Nova Scotia in the early 1900s, yet we know nothing about their hockey traditions. So it's up to the historians now to go down there and look. We also know that Moncton, New Brunswick, Fredericton, New Brunswick are 2 areas where black hockey existed in the turn of the century. Again, we know nothing. So it's time for historians to go down that avenue. We now have identified 2 black hockey teams in Oklahoma City and 2 additional hockey teams out of Tulsa, just after the Tulsa riots. So we now know there's 4 black hockey teams playing in Oklahoma in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So that's a whole new avenue of research that's been opened up. We now know that Volz's Colored Monarchs, he was recruiting from across North America, from Pittsburgh all the way to Nova Scotia. That's another area that's opened up. And we now know that there was at least one other individual trying to build a black hockey team out of Winnipeg. And he was a former CFL football coach. And he was recruiting across Ontario and Manitoba, and that's another area that's opened up. So that's where we are today. I don't want to talk all night, but that's where we are today in terms of the CHL. It's a whole new game, and it's a remarkable history. It's a Canadian history, it's a black history, it's a Nova Scotia history, but at the end of the day, it's all our history. And as Canadian historians, we're proud of the fact that Parks Canada has recognized this league and recognized this legacy and made it have basically mainstreamed this history. It's no longer on the outside looking in, it's part of the cultural mosaic of Canada. But again, that's where we are. We're proud of that, and I hope to see much more information in the future. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much for this, George. I remember the first time I found out about the league, how surprised I am. And now you're telling me that you're finding way more information. I can't wait to get to read the next book. That's amazing. So now the next part of the evening is a panel discussion that will be moderated by Bob. So just to let you guys know, on your speakers, when you need to speak, you've got the button right there, and then you hit it again to mute yourself. So I'll turn it over to Bob to introduce the other panelists. You've already met George, and then let us know what great questions you have for them.
Thanks, JM. I should mention that in terms of George and Darryl, as part of their research, they have put together a document that contains the names of players by team and by year. And there's something, it's interesting to know that there's approximately over 400 blacks have played in that league over the period of the existence of the league, which is quite something. And I think maybe as a result of your additional research, there will be or are many more names to be identified in that comprehensive document that you have put together.
Yeah, we're 85 teams on average.
85 teams on average, where we've got 6 to 10 people on each of those rosters. So we're well over 500 names now of individuals that have played on these teams. And when you start to put it all together, and you start seeing who they are, you can see the family traditions, you can see the family heritage, you can see the grandfathers playing with their basically grandfathers and their sons and the sons' sons. So 3 generations going up in this league. And this is like I said, this is a league that had been eliminated from the historical record. So it's just stunning, actually, when you start to look at that. So.
Yeah, and I might add, it's been a labor of love and a tough journey, which George can attest to, and I think reflected on in terms of where they are today. And there's still a ways to go in light of the new information that you have sort of brought to light. And I must say, had it not been for George and Daryl, tenacity in terms of uncovering this history that has been dormant, we would not know and I think appreciate the history that we have. And for that, I certainly, and I know many others, are much appreciative that you and Daryl have put into the research and the books. Yeah. For this part, we will have I will be asking a series of questions to Robert Downey as well as Mark Fraser and even George. But to begin with, I'd like to introduce Robert Downey, fellow Nova Scotian. Robert is the 7th generation Black from Halifax. He's a descendant of James Ivan Tude Talbot, the great uncle, and St. Clair Pansy Byard, great grand uncle, who played with the Truro Sheiks and the Victorias in the Colored Hockey League in the 1890s. Robert graduated from St. Mary's University, my alma mater, in Halifax, where he obtained a Bachelor of Commerce degree in 1981. He retired from the Federal Public Service in 2018 after 33 years as a human resources professional at successive levels of responsibilities in various disciplines in several key departments. Robert was among the organizers of the original Black History Week in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 1984, which has grown into the month-long annual African Heritage Month celebration that is in that province. In September 2014, Robert submitted a suggestion to Canada Post Stamp Advisory Committee for a commemorative stamp to honor the all-Black No. 2 Construction Battalion. The suggestion was approved and the stamp issued in January 2016. As a member of the National Apology Advisory Committee, he advised the federal government on an apology which was issued in July 2022 for its racist treatment experienced by the men of the No. 2 Construction Battalion.
Thank you.
Now, the gentleman to my right, Mark Fraser, was born in Ottawa to the former sprinter, Ontario Court of Justice, and interim chair of the Hockey Canada, Hugh Fraser. Mark played with the Gloucester Rangers of the Central Junior Hockey League from 2002 to 2004, and then the Kitchener Rangers of the Ontario Hockey League from 2004 to 2006. He was selected by the New Jersey Devils in the third round, 8th overall, of the 2005 NHL entry draft. Between 2007 and 2017, Mark played for the New Jersey Devils, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Edmonton Oilers, with stints in their AHL affiliate teams. On September the 28th, 2015, our Ottawa Senators signed Fraser to a one-year, two-way contract. After 1 year playing for the team's AHL affiliate, the Binghamton Senators, he left as a free agent and returned to the Edmonton Oilers on a one-year, two-way deal in July 2016. As an unsigned free agent leading into the 2017-2018 season, Mark opted to pursue a career abroad, where he played until 2020 with teams in the Finnish, Slovak, and German hockey leagues. After his playing career came to a close, Mark was hired by the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Maple Leaf and Sports Entertainment in February 2021 for a role focused on player development with his equity, diversity, and inclusion team. He faced many challenges as one of a few black players in the NHL. Now he's helping to change the narrative as a Maple Leafs Director of Culture and Inclusion. Mark Fraser, ladies and gentlemen. Now, for each of the gentlemen, I have a few questions in mind that I'd like to ask them and get their response to. Beginning with George. George, what motivated you and Daryl to write and eventually publish the history of black hockey in the Maritimes?
My family roots go back to Nova Scotia to the 1600s. My family are French Acadian, and they were. My father was Ukrainian. His family roots from 1898 in Canada. And when I was a kid growing up, I was a voracious reader, and I read a lot of history. And I used to get into trouble arguing with my professors and teachers when I was in elementary school and on out, because I thought that they got the history wrong. And I was of the conclusion that Canadian history wasn't being promoted properly, and that it wasn't being celebrated, and that we were being taken for granted in terms of being either British subjects or North Americans or Americans. And so I always thought that Canada had a unique identity, and that we had our own unique culture. I always knew who I was and who my family were and what our roots were. And I know that French Acadians had a unique history, and most of it is not in history books. So we started to, when we were writing our history, we wanted to write Canadian history. We always did. When we started with the we wanted to write Canadian history, and it was in it. It was just who we were, because we felt there was a need. It was never about making money. We've, like I said, over the years we've written 15 books, and 80% of the content is Canadian related. We're doing it out of New York, of all places, But it's easy to do that way. It's hard for people to steal your ideas if they don't understand. And if they don't understand Canadian history, they're not going to copy it. So it was one of those things. I went in, and when we wrote Black Ice, I had spent 7 years going from door to door in New York trying to get people to take that story seriously, knocking on doors, trying to get documentary films made, and trying to get movies done, all kinds of stuff. And they would just give us this blank look. And we just said, we're just going to do it for the love of what we were doing rather than to follow any, financial reason or purpose. I would never have been a Canadian historian if it was about the money. It's not. It's about a personal quest to tell our story, and that's what it is. It's not. I'm 65 years old now. I just turned 65 a couple of weeks ago, and I've been in this game as a historian for 40 years, and I can honestly say that I can look back at my work and be happy that I did that because I lived my dream. And a lot of people can't say they lived their dreams. So in that sense, I feel even though I don't have a multi-million-dollar deal with somebody or lots of money, I have a sense of who I am, I have a sense of purpose, and I'm happy because I was able to live my dream. So that's where. But the Black Ice is part of it.
Yeah, thanks. As a follow-up, George, on your book's release, how would you say it was received by other historians and sports journalists?
Sports journalists like Jeremy Schaap. Jeremy Schaap is is an exceptional journalist working for ESPN. He's very well read. When I was working with him or talking to him, I was amazed at how much history he knew. And he totally accepted this research, didn't even question it. He spent a lot of time reading British military histories and things like that, and all kinds of things. So people like him, who are very well read, had no problem accepting this research. I found that a lot of people who claimed to be historians were really historians, and those were the ones we got the biggest abuse from. These were people that already had preconceived views of how history should be and what was history, and those were the people that came after us. And I was actually surprised by some of the people that came forward, and because if you learn anything from history, it's that history evolves. It's constantly changing. Every 20 years or so, we discover something that we didn't know, and we have to rewrite our history books. So I always felt that, it was just a natural thing that as we discovered more things, we'd get more information. But the fact that some people try to limit that was, I thought, shocking. And the fact that people were so angry about it was another thing that shocked me on a personal level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, George. So the last question: why do you think it took so long for mainstream society to acknowledge and accept the role of African Nova Scotians in the development of the game, which we know today in terms of the style of play and innovations like the butterfly style of goaltending and the slap shot?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know why it took so long. Well, you know what? Why it took so long? Why it took so long? Because I think people are so isolated now, and so uninformed that it's not like back in the day where they were limited to their information. And there's a lot of multiple tracks of information out there. A lot of it's wrong, and I think that part of the problem. People just don't know what's true and what's not. We didn't have that problem years ago. People pretty well were limited in what their sources were, and they were able to trust those sources. We can't trust a lot of our sources today, so I think that's another reason. Plus, they always felt that because we were white historians, we had an ulterior motive, right? Because we were writing Black history, and they couldn't understand that either. They almost wanted to say that because we were writing some about a minority, we were doing something, we had some other agenda. And they didn't quite understand the fact that, when we write our history, we write about everybody. Like I said, our first book was about 40 different cultures, so we didn't, we wrote about the Incas not because we wanted to be an Inca or we wanted to benefit off of Mexican tourism or something like that. But they assumed the minute you write Black history, there's an ulterior motive, so it was kind of bizarre. Again, it was one of those things where we were more puzzled than we were surprised by some of the responses we got. Just because it seemed to be a double standard in the way they looked at us and the way they looked at some of these other histories that we were trying to write. And again, it's just in our society. I think we're still evolving in terms of acceptance of other people. So that was another thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly hard to get past the stereotypes, stereotyping with respect to blacks. And as you know, through your research and writing, the fact that it was often said, and it goes back to sort of Darwinism and the perspectives and the philosophies that developed out of his whole body of research and theories with respect to blacks. For example, it's often been said that blacks have an aversion to cold weather and playing in cold arenas, and that they lack the intelligence and ability to organize, games and so forth. So those kinds of ways of thinking, I think, have carried over the years and have fed into that narrative that blacks don't have what it is to play hockey.
Well, one thing I always thought was kind of ironic, you got, if you study the Underground Railroad history, and you see how active the black emancipators were and how smart they were. They created the Underground Railroad, one of the greatest escape routes the world's ever seen. And yet they're saying that these people lack the intelligence to organize a hockey league. You think about that. How can you be smart enough to get people from New Orleans all the way to Toronto and Chatham and over to Nova Scotia without being seen and escape? Yet you can't organize 4 teams and play 5 or 6 games in a season. I mean, just the idea. 2 weeks ago, I had a debate with somebody who claimed the colored hockey league had never existed, and that blacks had the lack, they didn't have the intelligence to organize a league, and that they tried for 20 years but could never get a league started. This was a guy that actually claimed he was an expert in the colored hockey league. I asked him if he was a historian, and he said no, but he deserved at least 5 degrees, he said, in history based on his own personal research. I asked him what his sources were, he couldn't cite one. I asked him where he got his information, he wouldn't tell me. And this was a guy that was floating around the Parks Canada to try to get them to cancel the event because he said the league had never existed. And I said, well, I got 210 newspaper articles that claim otherwise. I got 30 years of research and over 200 sources. And I got names, dates, and photographs. What do you have? He had nothing. And yet he still believed this league had never existed. So how do you even go there with people like that? And we had a special meeting in the Black Cultural Center. They have this guy area his demands. And they asked me to speak to him. And after about 10 minutes, I didn't know what to say. It was like talking to a wall. And yet this guy was given oxygen to make claims like that, to question 30 years of research. And how do you explain that? You can't. You can't explain it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, George. Robert, when and how did you become aware that your great uncle and great granduncle played with the Truro Sheiks and the Victorias?
It's quite quite interesting and funny. It's probably late in life. I'm not exactly sure. Probably, I would say maybe around the time that George and Daryl's book had come out, that I sort of learned, the expanse of the colored hockey league, whatever. I had always prided myself as a pretty articulate guy and inquisitive guy, and over the years, I've become somewhat of an unofficial family historian, particularly on various sides of my family. Both James Ivan, Tude, Talbot, and St. Clair, Pansy, Byard are on my mother's side of the family. Tude on my mother's father's side, and Pansy on my mother's side. So both from Truro. And because of my inquisitiveness, I guess some older cousins had kind of taken me under their wing, and they liked the fact that I was interested in family history and whatever. So they opened up probably their books, their photographs, and whatever, and I was privy to maybe some information that I would not have otherwise been. My only regret, I guess, is that I didn't start this journey a little earlier on, when some of the other elders would have been alive, that I could have picked their brains for knowledge.
Pardon for interrupting. Just when you're not speaking, just turn off the mic so it avoids the feedback. Thank you.
How did you feel about learning all of this?
Well, obviously, I was very proud, on both, and sort of intrigued. Initially, at first, I'd known. I don't want to jump ahead, but I'd known of my Uncle Clobie Collins's exploits in hockey later on. He would have followed Pansy and Tude. He's one of a great number of fantastic athletes in many sports that had come out of the small black community of Truro. So I'd known of my Uncle Clobie's involvement and his exploits in the senior leagues in Quebec, and also in Newfoundland, where he eventually became a member of the Newfoundland Hall of Fame. But I guess it was, as I say, around the time that Daryl and George's book would have come out, and I would have seen the pictures of the Truro hockey team, recognized immediately my two relatives. We were able to circulate at that time, much like I guess they've done with some of the other photos, so while some of the elders were still alive, and start to put names to these unknown figures in the pictures. And certainly it was a source of pride that two of my relatives had played for the Truro team.
Mm-hmm. Given what you know now about the CHLM, how do you feel about the government of Canada's designation of the league as an event of national historic significance?
I'm elated by it, and I think it's quite deserving. And I think there are a number of historic events, figures, or whatever that have not been recognized. And I think just over the last, let's say, 20, 30, whatever many years, people in the black community have been learning about the process, have been putting submissions together. A lot of times, it's easy, as you know, Bob, with the stamp and whatever. Somebody may be deserving of a stamp, a coin, a recognition, but if somebody doesn't do the research, if somebody doesn't put pen to paper and put a submission and get and get the facts behind it, it doesn't happen as deserving as they may be. But what I guess this proves to me is, being a seventh generation black Nova Scotian, having been in this country for over 200 years, what this signals to us, particularly with the sport of hockey, which is, hockey is as Canadian as they say, it's American as apple pie. So it's a part of our fabric. And I guess to me, the fact that black Canadians, black Nova Scotians, black Maritimers were playing organized hockey at a very high level over 100 and some odd years ago, and were, at that time, the equal of their counterparts, from the larger community who were playing hockey. And this is before the hockey, and if people are really historians, it goes back before, at one time, the Stanley Cup was a challenge club. It wasn't the purview of the National Hockey League. Teams across the country, could compete, for this amateur trophy, whatever. And I guess just to me, the fact that then, as much later as you and I were, when we were playing some pickup hockey, and that the fact that black Canadians could reach the heights that they could without sponsorship, without access to indoor rinks or at prime time. The fact that they were able to compete on a footing with their counterparts, it's just an immense sense of pride.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I must say, had it not been for Robert's assistance as a result of the stamp for the number 2, it was based on the information you provided to me, that helped me greatly in terms of formulating and submitting my suggestions to Canada Post. Yeah, so
very happy to do so, and it was very, very deserving,
Yeah. So thank you.
Maybe Robert would like to model his jersey.
Yeah, that's nice.
Please.
Stand up, Robert. He designed that himself.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. If you can't see, what is it? The logo, Robert.
So I'll just very briefly. So there's a lot of detail that went into this, or whatever. So the crest, the team crest, is the badge for the number 2 Construction Battalion, affectionately known as the Black Battalion. So on the shoulder patch, you have the Black Battalion. Also on the shoulders, you have the fire engine style number 2, which was an integral part of the badge. And on the back, I'm repping my paternal grandfather, Private George Alexander Downey, who's a veteran of the First World War, number 2 Construction Battalion, and the Veterans Guard. And George was one of, I think at last count, I count about 18 relatives on the various sides of my family that served in the number 2 Construction Battalion.
Very nice.
And just as a follow-up, and an interesting point here is that in terms of the Colored Hockey League, there were a number of men and relatives of men who actually who played hockey, but fought in the First World War. They weren't initially welcomed, but eventually, I think as a result of casualties that were experienced in terms of the white soldiers, the government felt it should open up the recruitment process to blacks. And there's a whole interesting piece and story with respect to that. And along with JM, we, Black History Ottawa, were hoping to, in November, have a presentation or a discussion on the number 2 in relation to the Colored Hockey League. And hopefully we will be able to organize a hockey game, maybe with players from, I believe it's Gagetown.
For engineering support group, which is part of the I think it's, five combat battalion or whatever, is the perpetuating unit. So they're the active unit that perpetuates the history and maintains the battle honors of the number 2 construction battalion.
Yeah. So that's, we're going to be looking into doing something on that in November. Yeah. When and how did you find out about the Colored Hockey League?
I would have found out about it. My mother gave me the book, and it probably would have been shortly after 2004 when you and your brother had written it. And thinking back to that time, and also based on your introduction of me, I think I was a Gloucester Ranger junior player locally, or maybe playing OHL for the Kitchen Rangers. But a few years probably following that. So that's when I first sort of discovered the history of the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes is just having been fortunate to have been gifted the book from my mother. Can't exactly recall when I would have been gifted it, if it was a birthday or Christmas present. But was immediately intrigued, and obviously I've grown up as a black hockey player, not often. It wasn't until I played professional hockey that I actually had my first black teammate. So, as a kid growing up and you're playing trading cards or you're playing video games and you're trading for all the black players in the game to be on your team, something that I definitely grew up experiencing. It was a sense of pride as well, and I found it very intriguing at probably been an old teenage, young 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Having played pro hockey for 10 years in the HL and the NHL, and now director of culture and inclusion for the Maple Leafs, what's your view on the current state of the game in terms of blacks?
That's a good question. In listening to what George had to say and some of the new findings and how you got to the position of uncovering some of the excellence of the CHL. In a lot of ways, as I think and reflect on where we're at today, I mean, no doubt have things improved. That being said, perhaps because of the role that I'm in now and how much I feel it has me in a metaphorical trench, it feels like not a whole lot has changed at the same time. In part, perhaps the very reason why I do have the position and the role I have with the Maple Leafs is because we had many institutions, and hockey's no different, had a real eye-opener in the summer of 2020 and during the pandemic. Well, maybe we need to look internally a little bit of different perspectives that have been participating in this institution, in this sport, within this league at the NHL level. And we're well aware of that participation, but we haven't really considered what that perspective, how those perspectives may differ. So there's, speaking from a player perspective, I can honestly say a lot, and having a 14-year pro career, and you mentioned 10 years here in North America, a lot of my experiences were positive. I was a Canadian kid growing up in Ottawa, got a chance to make it to the NHL, play for the Maple Leafs and the Oilers and the Devils, and friends for life, will come out of those experiences. But along the journey, I've had now the privilege to connect with a small cohort of black alumni who played for the Toronto Maple Leafs. There's been over 1,000 players who played, worn the Leafs jersey in the over 100 years of our organization. And with Ryan Reeves, our current player, only 9 of us have been black. And when you have the opportunity to meet Grant Fuhr for the first time, and you realize in the first 20 minutes of talking to him that he understands or he knows experiences that I've had, and we understand each other on the way, that guys who were at my wedding party as teammates of mine don't know that I've experienced. So there's a long journey still ahead, and roles like mine are happening, but I think one of the major improvements is whether it be from the extensive decades of research, which results in a book, which results in a second edition of the book and a couple documentaries, and perhaps some unfortunate tragedies in society leading to opportunities for new learning, I feel there's much stronger appetite for the broader hockey community and ecosystem to sit back and understand. So this representation can certainly improve. For a youth level who play the sport, there's still a lot of barriers faced and difficulty and isolation experienced within the game of hockey, but I think the overall, something that might be different is the amount of allies we have, the amount of support, the amount of individuals like George and his brother who might not be specifically from a black or racialized community, but understand that we are very much part of history, are very much deserving of opportunity to participate, whether it's hockey or anywhere else. So it's improving, but there's still quite a long journey ahead.
What do you see, and I think you may have already touched on, what do you see as some of the other barriers for blacks sort of making it to the NHL, let alone minor hockey?
Mm-hmm. Well, an obvious answer, which is not going to be my answer, but an obvious answer to barriers for hockey participation is obviously socioeconomic challenges. And why I won't give that answer is because that's just also suggests, especially in the 21st century in 2025, that black families, black people, or people of color don't have economic means to afford private lessons at a tennis court, a golf course, or a hockey arena. I think part of the challenges is obviously whether it's an experience like my Jamaican father immigrating to Canada and falling in love with the Canadian game from Kingston, Jamaica to Kingston, Ontario, and being the first black family there. Hockey's an easy way on the playground or on the streets to make friends. I think part of the challenge is still there's a lack of representation. So whether it's a newcomer story or whether you're seventh generation Black Nova Scotian, you don't always believe you can do something if you're not seeing it. And a story my father shared many years ago before he was a judge and he was a lawyer, former Olympic athlete, and he spoke at a school as a lawyer, and one of the students came up to him afterwards and said, "I didn't know you could be a lawyer if you were black." And so I feel it's the same, we can understand that sort of, you can't believe it if you can't see it, I guess, analogy. And beyond that, some of the barriers, because what's very different from living here in Ottawa, Bob, and seeing what youth hockey here looks like, and there's certainly a new generation of multiculturalism and youth who are diverse, who are falling in love, and families who are playing the sport. Toronto and the Greater Toronto Hockey League, the youth hockey league there, hockey looks very different. The arenas, when I go into them for particular events, there's a young player of color on every team, if not multiple. But the difference sometimes is that they won't last beyond the ages of 14 or 15 years old. And part of that is because they are still ousted, they're still targeted, they're still met with what feels for the families constant and consistent racial slurs and epithets and mistreatment and being refereed differently. And I feel being a black or biracial individual, there's a certain layer of toughness that you inherently develop where you might be capable to handle something of that nature if you were on the street, or if you're out at a nightclub, or you're in an area where you might be able to turn the other cheek and say that's just some fool. We don't feel like in the safety of a youth soccer field, baseball diamond, basketball court, hockey arena. There's just this general concept and belief that this is a safe environment for our children. And when your children enter a metaphorical playground and they have to deal with racial epithets, what for some might be annually and others might be weekly, I feel that's a real deterrent. And unfortunately, there's not enough repercussion and guidance and governance in place, which seems silly. You could cross-check a kid in the head and you know the penalty, but you could call a kid an N-word and they'll mull over it for months. And the family or the victims, if anything, might actually be worse off in the end because there's no plan for restorative justice, there's no empathy really for the victim, and in turn it's just that overall institutionalized sort of message of we want you here, but we're just not really going to understand your side of it or how to protect you safely. And unfortunately, I really do feel like that's a little, hockey's not unique in that. I think there's a lot of institutions and ecosystems in our life where that's synonymous with society. I feel at times as being a black individual, sometimes maybe not feeling like you're protected or having the opportunity that you should. Doesn't mean you can't be excellent, doesn't mean you can't rise above, doesn't mean you can't be resilient and still excel. But I feel as a mass, it's probably a significant deterrent for many.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists. We've come to the point where I'd like to provide those of you that are here, if you have any questions for any of these distinguished gentlemen, please, we'd like to hear them for the next, I guess, maybe 5 minutes or so.
Mark, did you find that the discomfort, sorry, it's not the wrong word, the fact that you were racially, called names, was that mostly in the younger time, or did you still feel that once you got to the NHL?
That's a good question. For myself, it would have been more at a youth level. I'm also fortunate that it actually didn't happen at least to my awareness as a young player, that often. Unfortunately, it seems to be a lot more, it's hard to say. It was certainly prevalent when I hear older players who grew up in the 60s and 70s playing. And it seems quite prevalent, unfortunately, now as well. At least from a lot of the families or youth that I speak to, more than I would have perhaps experienced. But for my own experience, it would have been less at a professional level, significantly less experience at a professional level. However, the difference at the professional level is it was now a business. So it wasn't by getting called a name on the ice, it was through other ways that you might feel a particular, we use the analogy of a family a lot in the locker room. We're all brothers here, we go to war together and everything like that. It's, but there's a lot of, I think, just general walking into the workplace every day where I would inherently be prepared to be met with something different. It wasn't going to stop me from coming back tomorrow, but I was just prepared.
So in the locker room, you're saying?
Everywhere, to be honest. Traveling with the team, whether it be on the bus, on the plane, in the airport. I would have dinner with your teammates, and not exactly from my teammates. Being the one different one in these environments of everywhere you go. That just happened to be our place of business was the hockey arena. But an example I often use now as far as the ways that it kind of continues once you get onto the business side versus an epithet or a racial slur on the ice as a young individual is one of my favorite things to do is watch practice and watch morning skate with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm not involved in the hockey side, I'm more sort of on the culture and business side of things, and sitting with our brass, with our management, GM, president, Brendan Shanahan, watching morning skate practice before a game. And a couple of years ago, this would have happened, but it was 3 times within the span of about 4 or so weeks that security would keep stopping me to see who I was and what I was doing. It wasn't in a manner of, sorry, sir, I don't recognize you, can I see your credential? It was, are you supposed to? It was, we know what it feels like when you're kind of being looked at. And I would think the irony of where I came from, the apparel, the team issued apparel I have on, I came from a lower level of the building, which suggests I was further through security than where I'm going actually now. I work for the team, I'm the director of culture and inclusion, but out of everyone I'm sitting beside who's not once been questioned if they should be here or not, I'm actually the only person who's played for this team. But there's just, when Mitch Marner walks through an arena and, a biracial black guy who's large with dreadlocks walks through an arena, there's perhaps just a presumption that I might not be in the right space. So it's a lot of that versus the harshness, I'd say, is unfortunate, more pervasive at a youth level.
Did you find that even on a team, yes, you're black, but there's other players that are different cultures. Did you receive that type of feeling as well from, say, somebody who's a player that's, First Nations, or someone who's
Them having
Hispanic
a similar experience?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We all.
So they're better than someone who's black because they're not as.
Like that? No, because we were all the only ones. So at the same time, again, in the ways the locker room works, that might be the same sentiment that the Russian player is feeling, because they're isolated just purely from a language barrier, or it's just really easy to poke fun at a Russian guy in a hockey locker room.
Right.
So there's empathy that can kind of be shared amongst that group, which is sometimes why the chemistry and fraternity is created in general. To some degree, we're all privileged to be there. Some of us might have come from different backgrounds of privilege, but when it comes to playing or being in that space with, Hispanic player and Indigenous player, we would actually connect on us being different than everyone else, because the Indigenous player's experience is actually very familiar to mine, and he might be the only other person who understands that thing that Grant Fuhr understood that I went through.
Did you feel it once you were in Europe? Did you have the same type of?
I didn't, but I was made aware in my second year playing there, which was in Slovakia, and wasn't a great league, and it was more of a means to an end to get to Germany, which worked. But I signed late. It was probably around October, November. The season starts late July, August, and by the time I arrived, the league wasn't great. There was one other player in the league who had more NHL games than me. It was a local, a Slovak, but other than that, my resume definitely spoke for itself to earn me a spot in that league. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to leave mid-season to go back to my Finnish team, and the team wouldn't release me, but I found out from one of our captains who spoke very good English and played in North America for a while, that prior to them signing me, and we were in a very good spot, second place team fighting for a championship, that the general manager had asked him and the other captain, the captain squad, prior to signing me, we're trying to go for a push here. We have this good defenseman who's played a lot of NHL games that could, help us out. How do you guys feel about bringing a black player onto the team? And I was told by my teammate that they all basically said if he can play and he's a good guy, we could care less. And that's the experience that I had. And I don't hate the general manager for doing that, because I truly feel like he was doing his due diligence. He signed me, so I feel like he didn't have a problem with me.
Yeah.
But he knew the environment of which they live in, and he was doing his due diligence to see, will this hurt our, team morale or chemistry or whatever. And I never once thought, wow, I showed up and basically was the best player on the team as a defenseman. That's saying a lot. And I might not have gotten the job because I was black. It was later in my career, but I thought I'd be naive to say any misfortune I had is because of the color of my skin. I don't believe that in that exact way, but it was a real eye-opener to think what other perhaps opportunities would have been taken away from me, not because of the credibility of my skill set, purely just because of this one thing I cannot change.
Right. Thank you.
I had a couple questions, but I think, Bob, you actually hinted at it just a few minutes ago. I was sitting on this for a while. I'm curious about the number 2 construction battalion and their, order of battle. I'm wondering, on a man-to-man level, what was the relationship? How much crossover was there between the Colored Hockey League and the personnel who ended up serving in World War I in the number 2 construction battalion? Part of the reason why I'm asking is because one of the topics I've become interested in over the last few years is in times of war, the interruption of hockey careers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering if there's any kind of, if any kind of idea of what the sort of numbers were throughout the First World War, and then were a lot of those players, a lot of the number 2 construction vets, did they go back and play hockey after that?
I can answer that. We identified 21 players in the number 2 that were part of the Colored Hockey League. After they came back, there was Colored Hockey League in 1921-22. They had a trophy commission, a league trophy, and the person who paid for that trophy and we say that in our book, as part of the new research, was one of the white officers from the colored hockey, from the number 2. And he donated the tree, was a very wealthy merchant, and he was, like I said, one of the white officers. And he donated the trophy to the league when he got back after service. It was quite a statement. And then the trophy was named in his honor. So it's one of those missing trophies from Canadian history, but it was donated by a white officer for the league. And we know the number of these players that had served overseas, and they came back. And we mentioned in our book, but again, we had counted 21. We also counted 10 number 2 players that were court-martialed. Number 2, I mean, battalion players that were, or battalion, number 2 constructed battalion soldiers that were court-martialed. We had 10 of them, I believe 10 or 12, and we found at least we documented in our book, the latest book, the murder of one of the soldiers that was found murdered. He was actually murdered by an Arab who was in the French army, and he had gone up and he found him dead on the road. So we found his old military papers, and we read that. About 100 pages of investigation we went through. Yeah.
Well, we can talk later about whether or not that man was murdered by who the French said was a Meadow.
Yeah.
There's other evidence that said no.
Yeah, you know, when we did our initial research, they said they found him on the road, and then they did an investment. And I pulled up his records, and they suspected it was this guy, and they had a I don't think they charged him. I don't know, but they named him.
Yeah, he's named. So you're talking about Charlie Sullivan, I guess?
The kid that was
the soldier that was murdered.
The soldier that was murdered, and there's 100 pages of documentation in his files, which I thought was quite amazing. And like I said, they investigated his murder, and they concluded it was this one guy. And again, he wasn't charged, but they had him as a French Arab. It was in the investigation. But again, like I said, it's I mean, it's open for debate, I guess is the word. But we put that in our book because we thought that was incredible information, that they had this, they actually investigated, and they actually had a suspect. So, but I just want to say something too. You know, it just happens that I brought some books with me tonight, and I noticed that if we don't count the people that organized it, I can give a free copy to everybody here tonight if you guys are interested. So they just started releasing the books, so like I said, I couldn't get a lot of copies, but I got enough for just about everybody here tonight. So
Thanks, Mr. Oprah.
Mr. Oprah.
You get a free book. You get a free book.
I'm going to sign them, and I'm going to hand them out here real quick here. But, yeah, we can have a discussion on that because I find that fascinating. You know, like I said, the last thing I expected when we were researching the number 2 to come across somebody's military files that had about 100 pages of documentation. That was mind-boggling.
Just 2 anecdotes, if I may, on the relationship between the Colored Hockey League, the Jersey, the Colored Hockey League, and the state of black hockey or hockey in Canada today. My nephew, we say, I think a 10-year-old goaltender in Medford, Nova Scotia. His father bought him a jersey, so he wears this as the goaltender. His mother contacted me a week ago asking me if I could put something together explaining the story behind the jersey so that he could wear the jersey for the rest of the month as opposed to his team jersey. So again, here, just that in itself, we talk about incremental steps. This little kid, 10-year-old, learning experience, public speaking for him, a confidence thing. He'll be into the dressing room wearing this jersey and being able to explain to him that his grandfather was, great-grandfather was a member of this battalion. The other thing I would say is this morning I received a call, an email from Kent Murray, the great-grandson of Dr. Murray, who was one of the white officers, the doctor for the number 2 construction battalion, and also a relative of renowned singer Anne Murray. He wanted to purchase a jersey for his son who played minor hockey. So again, just the fact, it intrigues me, the interrelationship. I'll be curious with George. I'm aware of some of the members of number 2 that would have played also in the Colored Hockey League before and after their wartime service. But both of these things, there are parallels, and I guess what it tells me, the greater thing beyond hockey, beyond military service, is as Black Canadians for 200 years or whatever, for as long as we've been in this country, we have tried to be an integral part of the Canadian fabric of Canadian society and participate, and we have, in every aspect of it.
I think on that note, thanks, Robert, for that. I think we would like to bring this session to a close. And as well as Jean-Marie, would like to thank the panelists for participating, and also thank you for coming out on this wintry night. So hope you have a safe journey home, and you're able to enjoy some of the Canada-US game. Thanks again.
Yes.